Hello, Reddit. I don't know if I'm writing this to vent, to find closure, or to figure out where I went so wrong. Maybe it's all three. My name's Nathaniel, though most people just call me Nate. I'm 37, and until last night, I thought I had a good grasp of my life. I thought I had a stable marriage, a future that was on track, and a wife I could trust. Turns out, I was just fooling myself. Her name is Evelyn. We've been married for 10 years. 10 years of what I thought was love, partnership, and loyalty. I gave her everything I could, my time, my energy, my trust. I worked long hours at the auto repair shop to make sure we had enough to cover the bills, her little hobbies, and the occasional getaway to keep things fresh. But as I write this, I can't help but feel like all of that was just a waste. Last night was the tipping point. Evelyn had been acting distant for weeks. She'd laugh less, spend more time staring at her phone, and make up excuses to leave the house for errands that seemed to take hours. I tried to brush it off as her needing some space, or maybe just going through a rough patch. But deep down, my gut told me something was wrong. I got home earlier than usual last night. I wanted to surprise her with her favorite takeout, a little olive branch since we'd been arguing more lately. The house was unusually quiet. Normally, she'd have the TV on, or there'd be music playing while she cooked or did some crafting. But there was none of that. Just silence. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, standing by the counter, holding her phone like it was glued to her hand. Her face was pale, and her eyes widened when she saw me. "Nate, you're home early," she stammered, quickly shoving her phone into her pocket like she was hiding something. "Yeah," I said, setting the food on the counter. "Thought I'd surprise you." She didn't even look at the bag. Usually, she'd be all over it, joking about how predictable I was for picking her favorite. But this time, she just stood there, fidgeting with her hands. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing. I just wasn't expecting you yet," she replied, her eyes darting everywhere except at me. That's when I saw it, the faint smear of lipstick on her collar, a shade she never wore for me. My heart sank. "Evelyn, what's going on?" I asked, my voice firmer this time. She hesitated, then gave me a forced smile. "Nothing's going on. You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word hit me like a slap in the face. I'd been nothing but patient, giving her the benefit of the doubt time and time again. But this wasn't paranoia. This was instinct screaming at me. I didn't push her then. Instead, I watched her carefully for the rest of the evening. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd jump like she'd been caught stealing. Every glance she threw my way was filled with something between guilt and defiance. Later that night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her sneak out of bed. I stayed quiet, listening to her footsteps as they crept downstairs. My heart raced as I heard her muffled voice. She was on the phone. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough. "No, he doesn't know. I'll see you tomorrow. I miss you too." That was it. That was the moment I felt the floor drop out from under me. My wife, the woman I'd built my life around, was talking to someone else like I didn't even exist. When she came back to bed, I didn't say a word. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but something told me to wait, to gather my thoughts and figure out how to handle this the right way. This morning, I decided I couldn't let it go any longer. I waited until she was dressed and heading for the door. "Evelyn," I said, my voice calm but firm. She turned, her hand on the doorknob. "Yeah, go ahead," I told her. "But the moment you step out that door, our marriage is finished. Don't ever think about coming back." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw fear flash across her face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by something colder. "You're being ridiculous," she said, rolling her eyes. "I'm going to work." I didn't respond. I just watched as she opened the door and walked out, slamming it behind her. Now I'm sitting here, staring at the clock, wondering if she's going to come back and try to explain, or if she's gone for good. Either way, I'm not sure it matters anymore. After Evelyn walked out the door, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the moment over and over in my head. Her face, her tone, the way she didn't even try to deny it. That cold look she gave me before leaving. It was like she'd already decided I didn't matter anymore. I couldn't just sit there. My mind was racing with questions, doubts, and anger. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait around for her to feed me some half-hearted excuse. So, I decided to dig. First, I grabbed her laptop. It was always lying around in the living room, and Evelyn wasn't exactly a tech wizard. She probably didn't even think to password protect anything. Sure enough, I got in easily. At first glance, nothing seemed off. Just emails, shopping tabs, and Pinterest boards full of DIY projects she never actually finished. But then I noticed a folder buried deep in her documents, labeled Work Files. My gut told me to click on it. What I found made my stomach churn. Screenshots of text messages, photos of receipts for expensive dinners I never attended, and pictures of her with another man. Smiling, laughing, holding hands. The timestamps on the photos told me this had been going on for months, maybe longer. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through everything. There was even a hotel booking confirmation from last weekend, the same weekend she told me she had a work retreat. I couldn't believe it. She hadn't just been lying to me. She'd been living a double life right under my nose. And the worst part? The guy she was with wasn't some random fling. His name was all over the texts and photos, Julian. Julian was a guy from her yoga class. I'd met him once at some community event she dragged me to last year. He'd shaken my hand, looked me in the eye, and made small talk like he wasn't screwing my wife behind my back. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm. If this was going to end, it was going to end on my terms. I took pictures of everything with my phone, every screenshot, every text, every photo. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I needed to protect myself. Next, I checked her phone. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, like she always did. She must have thought I wouldn't dare look through it, but at this point, all bets were off. Sure enough, her messages with Julian were there, plain as day. There were texts about how much she couldn't wait to see him again, how exciting it was sneaking around, and how I was too clueless to ever figure it out. That one hit hard. Clueless. That's what she thought of me. I'd been working my ass off to give her a good life, sacrificing time, energy, and peace of mind, and she thought I was clueless? But the messages weren't just about them. There were conversations with her friends, too, ones I'd never seen before. They were encouraging her, egging her on, telling her how brave she was for finally living her truth. One of them even joked that she should leave me for Julian because he looks like he'd be better in bed. I don't think I've ever felt more humiliated in my life. I couldn't stop myself from reading more, even though every word was like a punch to the gut. Then I found the last straw, a message she sent to Julian just hours before I confronted her at the door. It said, "I'll tell him soon. He deserves to know, but I want to do it my way. Just wait a little longer." Her way? What the hell was her way? Was she planning to just drop it on me one day over breakfast? Or maybe she was hoping I'd figure it out and save her the trouble of breaking it to me. Either way, she was clearly in control of this whole charade, and I was just the clueless husband she thought she could string along. By the time I finished going through her phone, it was nearly noon. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, but I didn't care. I was running on adrenaline and anger. I knew I needed to confront her, but I didn't want to do it impulsively. If this was going to be the end, I needed to make sure she couldn't twist the story to make me look like the bad guy. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I printed out the screenshots, saved all the messages, and backed everything up to a cloud drive. I even contacted a lawyer, a friend of a friend, who gave me some quick advice about how to protect myself if this went to court. Around 6 p.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart was pounding as I waited for her to come inside. When she walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me sitting there, a stack of papers in front of me and her phone in my hand. "Nate, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with fake innocence. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I held up her phone, showing her one of the messages from Julian. Her face turned white. "You want to tell me what this is?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. She froze, her eyes darting between me and the phone. For the first time in a long time, she looked genuinely scared. Evelyn stood there frozen, her keys still dangling in her hand. For a moment, the house was completely silent except for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Her pale face said it all. She knew she was caught. "I'm waiting," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. Inside, though, I was anything but calm. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking from the sheer adrenaline coursing through me. "Nate, I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like," she finally stammered, her voice shaky and unconvincing. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "So the text about sneaking around, the hotel receipts, the photos of you holding hands with Julian, those are just, what? Innocent misunderstandings?" She took a step back, dropping her purse onto the floor. "You went through my phone? My laptop? That's an invasion of privacy." That was her defense? Privacy? My blood boiled at how quickly she tried to shift the blame onto me. Privacy? I shot back, standing up and glaring at her. "Don't you dare turn this around on me, Evelyn. You've been lying to me for months, probably longer. And you think you can hide behind privacy? No, not this time." She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, Julian and I have been seeing each other. But it's not like I wanted this to happen, Nate. You've been so distant lately, so uninterested. What was I supposed to do? Just sit around and wait for you to notice me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Uninterested? Distant? I said, my voice rising. "I've been working my ass off to provide for us, Evelyn. Everything I do is for you, for this marriage. But while I was busting my back at work, you were busy sneaking around with another man. That's your excuse?" She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "You make it sound so black and white, but it's not. I didn't plan for this to happen. Julian understands me in ways you don't. He listens to me. He makes me feel alive." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for a brief moment, I almost let the sadness overpower the anger. But then I remembered everything I'd seen, everything she'd done, and the anger came roaring back. "Alive?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You feel alive while lying to me? While tearing apart the life we built together? You feel alive sneaking off to hotels while I'm here, thinking I'm the one falling short? Unbelievable." She didn't respond, just stared at me with a mix of defiance and guilt. And then, like a spark igniting a fire, something in me snapped. "Here's what's going to happen, Evelyn," I said, stepping closer to her. "You're going to pack a bag, and you're going to leave. Right now. Go to Julian, go wherever you want, but you're not staying here. Because the moment you stepped out that door this morning, our marriage was over." I meant it. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Nate. This is our home. I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You made your choice. Now live with it." She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to fight back or give in. Finally, she let out a frustrated sigh and stormed upstairs. I heard her throwing things into a bag, slamming drawers and muttering under her breath. Part of me expected her to come back down and beg for forgiveness, to cry and plead for another chance. But she didn't. When she came back downstairs, she was carrying a duffel bag. Her face was a mix of anger and sadness, but she didn't say a word. She just walked to the door, paused for a second, and then turned to look at me. "You'll regret this, Nate," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You'll see." I didn't flinch. "Goodbye, Evelyn." And with that, she walked out the door, slamming it behind her. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been. Part of me wanted to scream, to break something, to let out the whirlwind of emotions tearing through me. But instead, I just sat down on the couch, staring at the floor in stunned silence. This was it. This was the end of everything I thought I knew. And yet, deep down, I knew it was also the beginning of something new, something I couldn't quite see yet, but something I needed to face. Alone. When the door slammed shut behind Evelyn, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever. It was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, replaying the confrontation in my head. Her words echoed like a bad song stuck on repeat. "You'll regret this, Nate." What was that supposed to mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Or just another way to manipulate me? I stared at her empty spot in the living room, the place where she'd always sat with her phone, texting away while I tried to talk about my day. The cushions were still indented from where she used to lounge, as if the house itself hadn't realized she was gone yet. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I been too harsh? Could I have handled it differently? But then I remembered the texts, the photos, the lies. No, she made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I picked up her phone from the counter where I'd left it earlier. There were still unread messages from Julian, and I couldn't help but scroll through them. Most were the same drivel. "Can't wait to see you. Miss you already. He doesn't deserve you." But one stood out. It was time-stamped just minutes before she walked out the door. "Make sure he doesn't find out about the money." The money? My stomach sank as I stared at the message. What money? I quickly grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. My heart stopped when I saw the balance. It was far lower than it should have been. Thousands of dollars were missing, transferred out in chunks over the past few months to an account I didn't recognize. My jaw clenched as the reality set in. She wasn't just lying and cheating. She was stealing from me, too. I felt a surge of anger so strong I had to close the laptop before I did something reckless. Evelyn had crossed every line imaginable, and I was done being the clueless husband she thought she could fool. She thought I'd regret this? No. The only regret I felt was not seeing the truth sooner. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. If Evelyn thought she could take my money, my trust, and my dignity, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. As I drove aimlessly through the city streets, my mind was a storm of anger and disbelief. Evelyn hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, she'd stolen from me. Those missing thousands weren't just numbers on a screen. They represented the hours I'd spent under cars in the shop, the birthdays I'd worked through, and the vacations we'd postponed because it wasn't the right time. And now, they were gone, funneled into some secret account for God knows what. I parked in an empty lot and opened my laptop again. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I needed to think logically. If she was funneling money out, there had to be a trail. I logged back into our bank account and started combing through the transactions. The withdrawals were small enough to avoid raising suspicion, but the pattern was clear. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, another chunk disappeared. I jotted down the account number where the money was going and decided to make a few calls. My first was to the bank, to see if I could get any information. The customer service rep was polite but unhelpful. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't provide details about accounts that aren't in your name." Frustrated, I tried another angle. I called my lawyer friend, the one I'd spoken to earlier, and explained the situation. "Nate, this is serious," he said. "If she's been transferring money without your knowledge, that's grounds for fraud. You need to document everything and act fast." He advised me to file a fraud claim with the bank and request a formal investigation. It was a start, but it still felt like Evelyn was one step ahead of me. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email alert. Someone had just used my credit card to book a hotel room. The name on the reservation wasn't mine, but I knew exactly who it was for. The hotel was only a few miles away, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was back in the car, speeding toward the address. When I arrived, I parked across the street and stared at the hotel's glowing sign. My heart was pounding, and my palms were slick with sweat. Part of me felt ridiculous. What was I even doing here? But the other part of me, the part fueled by betrayal and anger, needed answers. I walked into the lobby, trying to look as calm and casual as possible. The receptionist glanced up and gave me a polite smile. "Welcome. How can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "Hi, I think my wife might have checked in earlier, but I'm not sure which room she's in." It's kind of a surprise visit. Her name's Evelyn. The receptionist raised an eyebrow but didn't press me for details. After a moment, she typed something into her computer. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose guest information. Of course not. I forced a smile and nodded. Thanks anyway. As I turned to leave, my eye caught a familiar figure stepping out of the elevator. It was Evelyn, and she wasn't alone. Julian was right beside her, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. My blood ran cold as I watched them walk toward the exit, hand in hand. I stepped outside and kept my distance as they crossed the parking lot. They didn't notice me, too caught up in their little bubble of stolen money and stolen moments. I followed them to Julian's car, a sleek black sedan that screamed midlife crisis, and watched as they got in and drove off. I didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, I snapped a few photos with my phone, clear shots of them together. I didn't know if I'd ever need them, but I wasn't taking any chances. Driving home that night felt surreal. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I kept thinking about how easily Evelyn had lied to me, how she'd looked me in the eye and played the victim while she was sneaking around with Julian. And now, with the money involved, it was clear this wasn't just about some affair. This was calculated. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat on the couch, staring at the photos I'd taken. This wasn't just about me anymore. Evelyn's actions had crossed into something deeper, something more sinister. And if she thought she could just walk away from this unscathed, she had another thing coming. I spent the rest of the night planning my next move. The first step was securing what was left of our joint finances. I logged into the account and transferred everything into a new one under my name only. Then I called the credit card company and reported the charges as fraudulent, ensuring she couldn't use my cards again. The second step was gathering more evidence. I wanted to make sure that if this went to court, or if she tried to spin some sob story, I'd have the facts on my side. I spent hours combing through emails, texts, and even her social media accounts, piecing together a timeline of her deceit. By the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted but resolute. This wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about making sure Evelyn couldn't manipulate or hurt me any further. She had made her choices, and now it was my turn. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, I stared at my laptop screen, bleary-eyed but determined. I'd spent the entire night piecing together Evelyn's web of lies, and what I uncovered only fueled my resolve. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was dealing with someone who had planned her betrayal down to the smallest detail. After securing my finances and gathering evidence, I decided to dig deeper into Julian. If Evelyn thought he was her golden ticket, I needed to know exactly who he was. A quick search of his name brought up his LinkedIn profile, a glossy, self-important page boasting about his career as a wellness coach and entrepreneur. The man didn't even have a real job, just a string of vague consulting gigs and motivational speaking events. He was, in short, a walking cliché. Scrolling further, I stumbled across something that stopped me cold. Julian had been married, was still married, according to his Facebook profile. His wife, Danielle, had posted a picture of them together just 2 weeks ago, smiling at some family barbecue. The caption read, 13 years strong and still going. My jaw tightened. So, Julian wasn't just a cheater. He was a fraud on every level. I couldn't decide if I felt more pity or anger toward Danielle. Did she know what her husband was doing? Did she have any idea he was funding his little escapades with Evelyn using my money, or hers? I couldn't sit on this information. Danielle deserved to know the truth, just like I did. But first, I needed to handle Evelyn. She hadn't contacted me since leaving the house, which I found odd. I half expected her to come storming back or at least send some scathing text, but there was nothing. That only made me more suspicious. What was she planning? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on 8th at 2 p.m. Don't ignore this." I knew it was her, even though she didn't sign her name. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but the other part, the one still holding on to a sliver of curiosity, needed to hear what she had to say. If nothing else, It was another chance to confront her face to face and maybe, just maybe, get some closure. At 1:45, I parked across the street from the coffee shop. I spotted her sitting at a corner table, fidgeting with her phone. She looked different, tired, disheveled, and not at all like the composed woman I'd seen walking out the door the night before. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it quickly dissolved when I remembered everything she'd done. I walked in, my footsteps deliberate, and sat down across from her. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't actually expected me to show. "Nate," she started, her voice softer than usual. "Thank you for coming." "Get to the point," I said, folding my arms. "What do you want?" She sighed, looking down at her hands. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I let things get out of control. Julian he was a distraction. But it's over now. I realized I want to fix things with you." I couldn't believe the audacity. "A distraction?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You lied to me, cheated on me, stole from me, and now you're calling him a distraction? Are you serious?" She flinched but didn't back down. "I was lost, Nate. I felt invisible in our marriage. I know I screwed up, but I want to make it right. I'm willing to go to counseling, to do whatever it takes." I laughed bitterly. "You think counseling is going to fix this? Evelyn, this isn't some minor issue we can talk through. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we built. And you think saying sorry is enough?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. She'd weaponized her emotions too many times for me to trust them now. "Look," she said, her voice trembling, "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But think about what we've been through together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It did," I said coldly. "But you threw it all away the moment you decided Julian was worth more than your husband. And let's not forget the money. Are you going to tell me where it went, or are we done here?" Her face went pale. "The money," she stammered. "It wasn't what you think. Julian needed help. He had debts, and I thought I was doing the right thing." "Debts?" I scoffed. "You drained our account to pay off some loser's debts? Unbelievable." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save it, Evelyn. I've heard enough. You made your bed. Now lie in it." I stood up and walked out without another word, leaving her sitting there, tears streaming down her face. I didn't care anymore. She'd made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. But as I drove home, something gnawed at me. Evelyn's reaction had been genuine, or at least it seemed that way. And if Julian had debts, that opened up a whole new set of questions. What kind of trouble was he in? And how deep had Evelyn gotten herself into his mess? As much as I wanted to wash my hands of the whole thing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn's story about Julian's debts was more than just an excuse. It wasn't like her to throw money away without a reason, no matter how misguided that reason might be. As much as I wanted to shut the door on this nightmare, the pieces didn't quite add up, and my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to dig deeper into Julian. If Evelyn had tied herself to him financially, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I started with a public records search. It didn't take long to uncover a trail of lawsuits, failed business ventures, and unpaid loans. Julian wasn't just broke. He was drowning. His so-called entrepreneurship was nothing more than a front for a string of scams, and he had left a lot of angry people in his wake. But the most alarming discovery came when I stumbled across a police report from 2 years ago. Julian had been arrested for fraud, using fake investment opportunities to con people out of their money. He'd served a short stint in jail but was released on probation. As I read through the details, my stomach turned. This wasn't just about Evelyn cheating or stealing money. She'd gotten involved with a man who had a history of destroying lives. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all sinking in. If Evelyn had drained our savings to bail Julian out of his financial mess, there was no telling how far she'd gone, or how much danger she was in. And if she'd been complicit in any of his schemes, she might be in deeper trouble than she realized. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number again. "We need to talk." It's urgent. Please. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Part of me didn't want anything more to do with Evelyn or Julian, but another part of me, the part that still cared, despite everything, needed to know what was going on. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Fine. Where?" Her response came almost immediately. The park near the library. 7 p.m. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at the park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the benches and pathways. I spotted Evelyn sitting alone on a bench, her head down, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She looked up as I approached, and for the first time, she didn't seem defiant or angry. She looked broken. "Nate," she said softly as I sat down next to her. "Thank you for coming." "Get to the point," I said, keeping my tone cold. "What's so urgent?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "You were right. About everything. About Julian. About the money. I messed up, Nate. I messed up so bad." I waited, letting her unravel the story herself. "Julian's not who I thought he was," she admitted, her voice shaking. "When we first started seeing each other, he told me he was in trouble, financial trouble. He said his business partners betrayed him, that he just needed some help to get back on his feet. I believed him. I thought I was helping someone who cared about me, but," her voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes. "But it was all lies. He wasn't in debt because of his business. He was in debt because of gambling. He owed money to people, dangerous people, and when he couldn't pay, they came after him. That's why he needed the money." I clenched my fists, my anger bubbling to the surface. "So you gave him our money to bail him out of a gambling problem?" She nodded, her face pale. "I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late. He kept asking for more, and I didn't know what to do. I was scared, Nate." "Scared of what?" I demanded. "Of them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The people he owes money to. They started threatening him, and me. I didn't think they'd go through with it, but last night—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "Last night what?" I pressed. "They showed up at the hotel," she said, her voice trembling. "They cornered us in the parking lot and demanded the money. Julian didn't have enough to pay them, and they hurt him, Nate. They said if he didn't pay by the end of the week, they'd come after me next." I stared at her, my mind racing. This wasn't just a messy affair anymore. This was something far darker. Evelyn had tangled herself up in a world of lies, theft, and now violence, and by extension, she dragged me into it too. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice cold. "You expect me to fix this for you? To swoop in and save you after everything you've done?" Her face crumpled, and she shook her head. "No, I don't expect anything. I didn't know who else to turn to. I don't know what to do." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. "You made your choices, Evelyn, and now you're facing the consequences. I can't save you from this." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Nate. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you. I don't want to end up like Julian." Her words hung in the air as I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with anger, betrayal, and something I didn't want to admit, pity. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But one thing was certain. Evelyn wasn't the only one in over her head now. Walking away from Evelyn that night should have felt like the end, like the final chapter in a story I desperately wanted to close. But as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't ignore the storm she dragged into my life. The words, "dangerous people," echoed in my mind as I drove home. This wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about the fallout her choices had created. And whether I liked it or not, I was standing in the middle of it. When I got home, I double-checked that the doors were locked, a habit I'd never given much thought to before. As I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I thought it might be Evelyn again, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. "We know about you. Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." It was clear who the message was from. The people Julian owed money to had decided I was part of the problem now. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, anger and fear warring within me. These weren't idle threats. They knew where I lived, and they clearly weren't afraid to cross lines. I had to act, but I needed to be smart about it. The first thing I did was call my lawyer friend again. I told him everything about Evelyn, the missing money, Julian's gambling debts, and now the threats. He was alarmed but pragmatic. "Nate, you need to document everything," he said firmly. "Keep a record of every text, every email, every interaction. And whatever you do, don't confront these people directly. You're not equipped to handle them." "What about the police?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He sighed. "You can report the threats, but without concrete evidence, they might not take it seriously. Still, it's worth filing a report just to have it on record." The conversation left me feeling both relieved and powerless. I hated the idea of sitting back and letting things unfold, but I knew rushing into anything would only make things worse. For now, I focused on gathering every shred of evidence I could. I forwarded the threatening text to my lawyer, saved it to my cloud drive, and backed up all the files I'd collected about Evelyn and Julian. The next day, I took my lawyer's advice and went to the police station. I explained the situation to the officer on duty, leaving out some of the more personal details about Evelyn's affair. He listened patiently, then nodded. "We'll file a report and keep an eye on things," he said. "But unless there's an immediate threat or physical harm, there's not much we can do." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the best I could hope for. At least now there was a record of the threats, which gave me a small sense of security. That evening, I got another text, this time from Evelyn. "Julian's gone. They took him. I don't know what to do. Please, Nate, I need your help." My heart sank. As much as I wanted to cut her out of my life, I couldn't ignore the gravity of her message. If Julian was really gone, that meant things had escalated faster than I expected. Against my better judgment, I called her. "What do you mean, they took him?" I asked as soon as she picked up. "I don't know," she sobbed. "He was supposed to meet me this morning, but he didn't show up. Then I got a call from a blocked number. They said he owed them too much and that he wouldn't be coming back unless they got their money." "And how much is that?" I asked, my voice flat. 20,000, she whispered. "They want 20,000 by tomorrow, or they said," she trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. The implication was clear. I rubbed my temples, trying to process everything. "Evelyn, I don't have $20,000 lying around. Even if I did, why would I use it to clean up Julian's mess? He's not my problem." Her voice cracked as she pleaded with me. "Nate, please. I know I don't deserve your help, but I don't know what else to do. They'll come after me next. I don't have anyone else to turn to." Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I almost caved. But then I remembered everything she'd done. How she'd lied to me, stolen from me, and dragged me into this chaos. No, I wasn't going to be her savior. Not this time. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," I said firmly. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I can't fix this for you." She started to protest, but I ended the call before she could get another word in. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, a mix of anger, guilt, and frustration bubbling inside me. I hated what this situation had turned me into, cold, distant, and unwilling to help someone I once loved. But I couldn't let her drag me down any further. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. When my phone buzzed at 3 a.m., I almost didn't look at it. But when I did, my stomach dropped. It was another text from the same unknown number. "Time's up. We're coming." The text on my phone screen burned into my mind. "Time's up. We're coming." For the first time since this mess started, real fear gripped me. This wasn't just about Evelyn's betrayal anymore. These people were dangerous, and they weren't bluffing. But fear had its place, and right now, I needed a clear head. I had no intention of sitting around and waiting for them to come to me. I grabbed my laptop and checked the security cameras I'd installed months ago around my house. At first, everything seemed quiet, but then I spotted them. A black SUV parked a few houses down. 2 men inside. No headlights, no movement. They were watching. I took a deep breath. I wasn't built for this kind of thing. I wasn't some action hero, but I wasn't stupid either. I wasn't going to let them corner me. I needed leverage. And I had just the thing. Part 9. The reckoning. The text on my phone screen burned into my mind. Time's up. We're coming. For the first time since this mess started, real fear gripped me. This wasn't just about Evelyn's betrayal anymore. These people were dangerous, and they weren't bluffing. But fear had its place, and right now, I needed a clear head. I had no intention of sitting around and waiting for them to come to me. I grabbed my laptop and checked the security cameras I'd installed months ago around my house. At first, everything seemed quiet, but then I spotted them. A black SUV parked a few houses down. 2 men inside. No headlights, no movement. They were watching. I took a deep breath. I wasn't built for this kind of thing. I wasn't some action hero, but I wasn't stupid either. I wasn't going to let them corner me. I needed leverage. And I had just the thing. Part 10. The trap. Before doing anything, I forwarded the threatening messages and screenshots of Julian's shady past to my lawyer and to a detective I knew through a customer at the auto shop. I kept my message short. If anything happens to me, this is who's responsible. Then, I made a call to Julian's wife, Danielle. "Who is this?" she answered groggily. "Danielle, my name is Nate. You don't know me, but I know your husband. Or at least, I know what he's been up to." Silence. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked. I laid it all out. The affairs, the gambling, the stolen money, the criminals after him. I expected her to hang up, to scream at me, to call me a liar. But she didn't. Instead, she let out a bitter laugh. "So, he's done it again." "Again? That was interesting. I should have known," she muttered. "He always finds a way to ruin people." "Listen, Danielle," I said quickly. "These people want their money, and if Julian can't pay, they'll come after whoever they think can. That includes me, maybe even you. But I have a way out, for both of us." I explained my plan, and she agreed. I parked my truck in a well-lit gas station parking lot and waited. If these guys wanted me, they'd have to come to a place with security cameras, witnesses, and zero escape routes. I wasn't playing their game. I was forcing them into mine. Sure enough, the black SUV rolled up. 2 men stepped out, both built like they spent their free time cracking knuckles and breaking noses. One had a scar across his cheek. The other, a cold, dead stare. "You Nathaniel?" Scarface asked. "That depends," I said casually. "You here to talk or make a mistake?" They didn't like that. Dead Eyes cracked his knuckles. "We don't have time for games. You know why we're here. Where's the money?" I smiled, pulling out my phone. Funny thing about threats. If you send them over text, they become evidence. I flipped the screen to show the messages. The cops have copies of these. My lawyer does, too. So if anything happens to me, you'll be the first people they come for. Scarface glanced at Dead Eyes. They weren't expecting that. I leaned against my truck. And here's the best part. Julian's wife just filed a fraud report against him. She's freezing every account he has. So even if you found him, you wouldn't get a cent. Scarface's jaw tightened. "You're lying." "Am I?" I shrugged. "Go ahead. Call him. See if he picks up." Dead Eyes pulled out his phone and dialed. After a few seconds, his expression darkened. "Line's dead." That was because Danielle had deactivated Julian's number an hour ago. "You idiots backed the wrong horse," I said, taking a step closer. "Julian's been playing you just like he played my wife. But you came after me instead of him. That was your real mistake." They weren't sure what to do now. I saw it in their eyes. They wanted to hurt me, to make an example of me. But now they were realizing it wouldn't be worth the heat. "So here's my counteroffer," I continued. "Walk away. Forget about me. Forget about Evelyn. Cut your losses and find a better business model. Because if you come near me again, I'll make sure every cop in this city knows your names." Scarface exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Dead Eyes glared at me for a long moment before turning back to the SUV. "Let's go," he muttered. I didn't move as they got into their car and drove off. Only when their taillights disappeared did I finally let out a breath. It was over. A week later, I got a final text from Evelyn. Julian ran. I don't know where he is. I'm scared. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. That was her problem now, not mine. Danielle followed through on her report, and the police started investigating Julian for fraud. His accounts were frozen, his credit cards shut down. He had no money, no resources. I doubted he'd last long before someone, either the law or the criminals, caught up with him. As for Evelyn, I never saw her again. She tried calling a few times, but I never answered. Eventually, she stopped. Maybe she went looking for Julian. Maybe she started over somewhere new. Either way, I didn't care. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was free. I changed my number, finalized my divorce, and focused on rebuilding my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace.